"We're going in a new direction," he said, in front of the board, while I was still standing, while the coffee in my hand was still warm. He fired me like I was a janitor caught stealing office supplies. But here's the thing, I wasn't angry. Because I knew something he didn't. I was the only one who knew how to keep the lights on. My name is Nathan Coleridge. I'm 39 years old. Was CTO of a SaaS company based out of Toronto. We built enterprise workflow tools for mid-sized businesses. If your HR team needed to onboard 80 new employees overnight, our platform made it happen. And the entire system, from the first AWS Lambda to the encrypted PostgreSQL clusters, I built it with my own 2 hands. Not metaphorically, literally. I wrote the first line of code, set up the IAM roles before we even had an HR department, debugged billing scripts at 3 a.m. while our CEO posted about culture on LinkedIn. I kept my head down, never asked for the spotlight, just made sure the architecture didn't collapse, until the day they decided I was too expensive, too legacy. It happened in Q3 board review. We were sitting in the glass boardroom that overlooked the skyline, the same view I used to dream about when I worked at my old job 6 floors below this building. The CEO, Marcus Glenn, stood at the head of the table, new haircut, designer suit, MBA polish. He didn't look at me when he said it. Just flicked through his deck like I was a footnote. "We've made the decision to streamline senior roles. We thank Nathan for his contributions, but we believe a leaner, more agile team can better execute our future goals." No warning, no closed-door courtesy, just a bullet point on slide 7. I was holding my coffee when he said it. I didn't put the cup down. I didn't argue, didn't even blink. I just smiled, because while he was presenting efficiency goals, I was already planning my exit path, not just from the building, but from their illusion of control. If stories like this hit close to home, consider subscribing. This isn't fiction. These are the kinds of real moments people rarely talk about, when everything you've built gets dismissed by someone who's never logged into a terminal. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The room stayed silent after Marcus spoke. A few board members looked down. Some nodded like they were waiting for me to protest. But I gave them nothing. I turned to the window, watched the reflection of my own face, calm, unreadable. They thought they were burying me. But what they didn't realize was that I'd been the one holding the map to the foundation. The entire AWS cloud backbone, billing servers, analytics queues, customer data encryption keys, all tied to a root credential only I had ever touched. They never asked. They never thought they needed to. Because people like me, we're invisible until everything breaks. I walked out without shaking hands. No folder, no severance letter. Just my badge. And the knowledge that their house of glass was built on lines of code only I could read. That night I made 2 moves. One was legal. The other was simply logical. But I'll tell you about those in the next part. Because this was just the preface. They thought I was just the guy who answered infrastructure questions. But I was the guy who built the questions before they even existed. They called me CTO. But the title never mattered. The code did. The logic behind the chaos. The thread between customer onboarding, internal billing, usage metering, and GDPR compliance. That invisible thread. That was me. I didn't just architect the system. I was the system. It started 5 years ago. We were a startup with a WeWork office and a pitch deck. No customers, no product. Just ambition and a founder with a TED Talk addiction. Back then, no one wanted to waste time on scalable infrastructure. They just wanted to demo something, anything. I pushed back, said if we built it wrong, we'd pay for it in 6 months. They rolled their eyes, engineering purist they called me. So I stayed late, came in weekends, wrote the first production API in Go because I knew we'd outgrow Python, spun up the first S3 bucket, defined our VPC subnets manually, wrote bash scripts that created entire environments in seconds. And when our first client onboarded 700 employees overnight and the system didn't crash, no one asked why. But they noticed. And for a few years, they respected me. I wasn't flashy. I didn't do off-sites or happy hours. I didn't pitch at investor meetings. I just made sure our systems never went dark. I was the guy they called at 2:13 a.m. when the Kafka queue jammed. The guy who logged into AWS from a hotel room on Christmas Eve because an intern accidentally deleted production assets. They called me the wizard. I hated that word. Because this wasn't magic. This was discipline, redundancy, documentation, layers upon layers of hardened infrastructure that no one wanted to understand until something broke. At some point, I became invisible. After the Series B round, we hired DevRel Marketing, a director of cloud evangelism. We started naming internal Slack channels things like Mission Control and Scale Like a Champion. People who couldn't write a cron job started talking about digital transformation. Meanwhile, I kept fixing broken pipelines with duct tape and YAML. And slowly, I began to see it. I wasn't part of the company anymore. I was just the thing keeping it upright. So I adapted. When they stopped inviting me to architecture reviews, I made my own. When they stopped looping me into roadmap meetings, I started keeping a quiet changelog, one that mapped the entire system across dozens of microservices, IAM roles, certificate chains, encryption protocols, and internal APIs. I wasn't paranoid. I was just tired of being the last one blamed when they pushed a half-baked deployment to production. So I created insurance. There are 3 root accounts to our AWS organization. 2 of them belong to secure emails controlled by the company. The third was created on day 1 by me, tied to a secure offline credentialing process with biometric backup and token auth. They let me keep it because no one wanted to break billing. No one asked questions. They just trusted me. That was their first mistake, and the one they'd learn from too late. I'm not saying I intended to use it. I'm saying I knew what would happen if I didn't have it. Because every system, no matter how resilient, eventually encounters its moment of stress. I wasn't going to break anything, but I was going to let them see what happens when the one person holding the thread lets go for a breath. And if you've ever been in that position, the quiet one who built the whole damn bridge but still gets blamed when someone else burns it, you're not alone. These stories help people feel seen. If you need that, hit subscribe. There's more coming. Much more. The thing about cloud infrastructure is this. It's not what you build. It's what you remember. What's been hard-coded, what's been patched, what's been deprecated, but still duct-taped to something business-critical. It's the ghost dependencies, the undocumented workarounds, the private repo no one's touched in 16 months, but is still the heartbeat behind customer invoicing. And Marcus Glenn, he didn't remember anything, because he never knew. 3 days after my public execution, I was replaced. Not by another CTO, by a team, a committee really, led by a 27-year-old VP of Cloud Operations. Fresh from a DevOps bootcamp certified in buzzwords allergic to context. He had slides and swagger, and a LinkedIn banner that said, "Breaking things to build better." I watched from a distance. A few former engineers still pinged me, screenshot snippets of Slack threads, Git activity. The team's first decision: refactor the onboarding engine. The same one that handled the account provisioning for 312 enterprise customers. Why? Because it wasn't clean enough. Their words, not mine. They deployed on a Friday. Of course they did. At 4:41 p.m. EST, I was at a Vietnamese place on Queen Street halfway through a bowl of pho when I got the first text. From Arjun, one of the senior support engineers who still had a soul. Billing API is throwing 503s. Onboarding queue stuck. Ops team is MIA. Did you change anything? I hadn't. Not yet. I sent back a single word, nope. Then I opened my laptop, VPN'd into the observability dashboard. Didn't touch a thing, just watched. By 5:12 p.m., 49 customer accounts had failed provisioning. By 5:18, the usage metering demon collapsed, which meant invoices were either blank or duplicated. By 5:23, the database restore job kicked off automatically and tried to mount a backup stored on an S3 bucket whose access policy hadn't been updated since 2022, which meant the restore failed, silently. I knew because I wrote the logging system to keep failures quiet unless explicitly configured. Nobody had ever changed that default. Somewhere in that chaos, Marcus must have figured it out, or at least sensed it. I know this because at 5:36 p.m. I got an email. Subject line: quick catch-up, might need some guidance. No apology, no acknowledgement, just desperation in a button-up shirt. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, out of principle. Because Marcus wasn't asking for help. He was asking for control back, and control isn't given, it's earned. That night I slept better than I had in months. Not because they were failing, but because I wasn't the one fixing it. The next morning I got another email, this time from someone higher up, Isabel Lamb, the board chair. She was calm, measured, professional. She asked for a call private, off the record. Said she had some questions about our infrastructure lineage. A beautiful phrase. Infrastructure lineage. As if systems were born and raised like children. I agreed to meet her. Not because I owed them anything, but because she asked the right question. We met in an anonymous conference room on the 17th floor of a private office building near King Street. Not at the company. Not over Zoom. She insisted on face-to-face. She said some things can't be put in email. She was right. Isabel Lamb had been on the board since Series A. Former COO of a multinational logistics firm. Elegant calculating. Not a talker, a listener. I'd only spoken to her once before. 2 years ago, after a late-night product launch. She came into the war room, looked around, nodded once and said, "You're the one who kept this from going sideways, aren't you?" I didn't reply. She just smiled and walked away. Now here we were, 2 coffees between us, no small talk. Just her eyes fixed on mine, and a tablet in front of her filled with status reports. She got to the point. "Tell me what we're standing on, Nathan." That was the sentence. The one that shifted the whole conversation. Not what went wrong, not can you fix it, but what are we standing on? She understood. This wasn't about bugs, it was about foundations. So I told her. I told her about the systems they were running, and more importantly, the systems they didn't even know were running. How the customer provisioning engine still depended on a script I wrote in 2019, a script that called deprecated APIs, but was wrapped in retry logic to keep it breathing. How the billing service was hard-coded with internal identifiers for payment gateways no one had touched since pre-Series B. How the database failover logic had never once been tested end-to-end in a live-fire scenario. And how their brand-new modernized deployments had unknowingly ripped out the thin wires holding all of it together. She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't defend Marcus, didn't blink when I told her the root credentials had never been properly rotated. That even now, right now, their AWS org could be irreversibly bricked by a single misconfigured policy. I wasn't threatening. I was simply answering her question. When I was done, she sat back in her chair, exhaled through her nose, tapped one finger lightly on the table. Then she said, "Can it be fixed?" I nodded, slowly. "Do you want to fix it?" I shrugged. "Would you if given full control?" I looked at her. This was the real question. Not about systems, about power. I told her the truth. It's not that I need control. It's that the system does. She stared at me for a moment. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She smiled, not smugly, not with manipulation, but like someone who had finally found the fire extinguisher after walking through smoke. The meeting ended without a decision. No deal, no proposal. Just a nod, and silence, and her last sentence as she stood. "You'll hear from us, soon." 3 days passed, no calls, no emails. Then, everything shifted. The internal Slack threads exploded. I didn't have access anymore, but someone screenshotted me the messages. Marcus had been transitioned out. His farewell post was 3 paragraphs long, full of nothing. And at the end of that same day, I got the email from Isabel. 1 line. Are you ready to rebuild it, right? I didn't dress up. No suit, no laptop bag, just jeans, a black hoodie, and the same boots I used to wear during late-night deploys. I walked past the front desk without a badge. Security didn't stop me. They recognized me. Or maybe they just remembered the silence that followed the last time I walked out. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt different this time. Not triumphant, not bitter, just level. I wasn't coming back for revenge. I was coming back because they had finally learned what they were standing on, and now they needed someone who knew the load-bearing walls. When I stepped into the main office, it was quieter than I remembered. Fewer people, more tension. Nobody cheered, nobody clapped, but heads turned. Some out of surprise, some with guilt, a few with relief. The new CloudOps team was nowhere to be seen. I heard later that they'd been reassigned to other initiatives. One of them apparently took a stress leave. Can't blame him. He'd inherited a jungle and thought it was a garden. I walked straight into the war room. Whiteboards, sticky notes, crash logs, a coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Waiting at the center table was Isabel and Thomas Kravitz, CFO co-founder, and the only other person who'd been there since the company was still renting folding chairs. He stood when I walked in. Nathan. Thomas. Glad you're back. Let's not pretend I ever left. He smiled, then faded. Fair. They offered me a contract, not an employment agreement, a consulting mandate, unlimited access, no hierarchy, complete autonomy over infrastructure design, implementation, and recovery. 6 months. Renewable. My rate 5 times what I used to earn. I didn't negotiate, I just asked one question. Do I get to choose who stays and who goes? Thomas paused, looked at Isabel. She didn't blink. Yes. That night I stayed in the office. Alone. No lights, just the glow of 3 monitors and the hum of a system that had limped its way through the last 2 weeks. I logged in. Everything still worked. Barely. But the bones were there. Because I had built them right, even for the people who hadn't earned them. I began with the access policies. Locked down every root-level credential. Rotated keys. Enabled logging where silence had once been strategy. Then I cleaned the backups, mounted new S3 buckets, verified integrity, laid out a recovery plan in bulletproof detail. And at 3:12 a.m., I pushed the first clean deploy since I left. No one noticed. No Slack fireworks, no kudos, no gifs of clapping pandas. But somewhere, 87 onboarding requests went through without error. For me, that was enough. 3 days into the rebuild, something strange started happening. People got quiet around me. Not out of fear, not even out of guilt. Out of recognition. Like they'd finally realized, this whole time they hadn't just fired a person. They'd unplugged a language none of them spoke. It started with an engineer Jaden knew hire maybe 6 months in. He knocked gently on the side of my open office door, not the one with my name on it, because I didn't have one. I'd claimed an old desk in the corner, on purpose. Hey Nathan, quick question. About the provisioning engine. I'm not sure I'm interpreting the flow right. I waved him in. He sat like someone asking their doctor if a Google search was enough. I looked over the code. He wasn't wrong, the structure made sense. If you didn't know that the third-party identity vendor, we used cached tokens in a way that broke after 72 hours, unless manually refreshed. Something no one had written down. Something I had simply learned and remembered. It's not in the docs, he said, reading my expression. No, because I didn't write it for people who would ignore it. He nodded, didn't argue, didn't look hurt. He just accepted it. Later that afternoon, someone from product pinged me needing access to the usage data warehouse. I denied it. 10 minutes later, they showed up in person asking why. Because if I give you access and you run a bad query on a live instance, you'll throttle 5 services, including billing. You want that? They shook their head. I just thought. You didn't think, you assumed. I wasn't angry. I was done making excuses for clarity. These systems weren't just fragile. They were alive, interdependent, and unforgiving. And the system, it remembers. It remembers who respected it and who didn't. If this sounds like something you've lived through, being the quiet architect, the unthanked fixer, the last call at 2 a.m., but the first to be cut at budget season, then you know how this feels. Stories like these aren't just stories, they're signals. Signals to the people who've been underestimated, overwritten, and quietly essential. So if that's you, hit subscribe, because the system remembers, and we're just getting started. It came at 2:17 a.m. Subject line: need your help, urgent. From Marcus Glenn. Yes, that Marcus. The same man who fired me in front of the board without blinking. The man who called my work bloated, my approach old school, my position redundant. Now he was writing like we were old friends, like none of it had happened. I stared at the subject line for a few seconds. Didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it was about. Because 4 hours earlier I'd seen something they hadn't. The logs, the slow, precise attempts. Auth tokens being brute tested against dormant service accounts. IPs routed through multiple layers of obfuscation, but sloppily, like someone rushing. It wasn't a full breach. Not yet. But it was probing. Smart, targeted. Someone knew what they were looking for. And that alone told me it wasn't random. I'd seen this pattern once before, years ago, when we absorbed a failed SaaS firm's data platform. Their former CTO left backdoors in the system before he was pushed out. Didn't sabotage anything. He just left himself a way back in. Insurance. 6 months later, their codebase was bleeding through third-party APIs they didn't even know they'd activated. It took me 4 weeks to clean up. So when I saw those patterns in our logs tonight, I didn't panic. I just leaned back in my chair and smiled. Because I knew this wasn't a hacker. This was karma. At 7:42 a.m., I finally opened Marcus's email. It was short, panic hidden behind formality. Hi Nathan, I'm hearing from some folks internally that there's unusual auth activity on a few back-end services. I know I'm technically not part of the org anymore, but if you're able to take a look, I'd appreciate your eyes on it. Hope you're well. That last line, hope you're well, almost made me laugh. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the logs to Isabel and Thomas, along with a 2-sentence summary. Suspected coordinated probe activity on legacy service accounts. Recommending full audit and key rotation within 24 hours. Already deploying initial lockdown sequence. 3 minutes later, Isabel responded. Do whatever you need. That was all I needed to hear. I launched the sweep script. The one I'd written for worst-case scenarios. It crawled through over 200 services, traced privileges, auto-expired dormant tokens, and generated new keychains on the fly. I revoked 6 vendor tokens, flagged 2 accounts for access revocation, and killed 1 account still tied to an ex-employee from a year ago, a quiet mid-level dev who'd left bitter forgotten. Not Marcus, but maybe someone he'd brought in. Didn't matter. The system was sealed. By noon, everything was quiet again. But the message was loud and clear. If Marcus had built the system, this breach would have happened a month ago. And no one would have noticed until the customer data started showing up on Reddit. He booked a meeting through Isabel. I agreed to it for one reason only. To see what a man like Marcus looks like when he no longer holds the knife. The conference room was smaller than the one where he fired me. No glass walls this time. Just a dim-carpeted cube with a silent HVAC system and too many chairs. Marcus was already inside when I arrived. He stood up, tried to smile. I didn't. He wore a blazer, same brand he always wore. But something had shifted. There was no presence in him anymore. No keynote energy. Just posture. He extended a hand. I didn't shake it. I sat. He followed. Thanks for meeting, he said. You didn't give me a reason not to, I replied. He nodded like that made sense. Like he deserved this grace. He didn't. There was silence. He looked down at his tablet, then back at me. I'll be honest. I'm not here to rehash what happened. What's done is done. I waited, but I've been getting calls. Some people are nervous investors' partners. They think I still have influence in the architecture and the roadmap. Some of them don't know I'm out. Others think I'm still advising. Are you? I asked. No. Good. He flinched. Just a twitch, but I saw it. So I'm here to propose something formal. A separation agreement. Something that publicly states I've stepped away. NDA language, mutual non-disparagement, the works. I let that hang in the air. And you want me to sign off on that? Not just you, he said. But your name carries more weight now. You're seen as the architect. There it was. Finally, a sentence of truth. He needed legitimacy, validation. He needed the man he fired to help him disappear quietly. I leaned back, looked at the table between us. You know what's interesting, Marcus? He said nothing. You built your brand on disruption, efficiency, replacing the old with the new. And yet here you are asking the same man you erased to write your epilogue. Still silence. You want my blessing, I continued. You get it. But it comes with a line in the sand. He raised an eyebrow. You stay out, I said. No blog posts, no interviews, no quiet advisory behind closed doors. You walk away completely. And you don't touch anything with our name on it again. He hesitated. Then, done. I stood. He didn't. I paused at the door, turned. Marcus, for what it's worth, I never hated you. His eyes lifted. But I did design this system to survive people like you. Then I left. I thought it would feel cleaner cutting the last cord. But peace doesn't come in tech. Not real peace. Because systems remember, and sometimes they whisper. A week after Marcus signed the separation agreement, things were quiet. Too quiet. Deploys were passing. Onboarding was stable. Billing was balanced to the cent. And yet, I had this itch. Something I couldn't place. Not fear, not paranoia. Something else. The kind of weight you feel when you walk into a room you used to live in. And nothing's been touched. But everything's slightly wrong. I started combing logs again. Not because I had to. Because I couldn't stop. Line by line, service by service. Looking for patterns, breath marks. The fingerprints that systems leave behind when they've been touched by someone who doesn't belong. And then I found it. It was a heartbeat. A single request to a deprecated endpoint. One we hadn't used in over 2 years. It didn't trigger any alerts. Didn't throw an error. But it pinged once. From an IP that was geofenced internal. Not a contractor. Not a vendor. It was ours. I checked the route. It came through a legacy Lambda, something that used to power our user analytics engine before we migrated to BigQuery. That Lambda had been scheduled for deletion months ago. But someone had paused the teardown. Someone, after Marcus was gone. It didn't make sense. Everyone on the infrastructure team had been vetted, rotated, cleared. So I started digging deeper. Not through the system. Through the people. It led me to a name I hadn't thought of in a long time. Eric Kwan, a former data engineer. Left 18 months ago. Quiet, efficient, always kept to himself. He'd had access to that analytics Lambda before the migration. And just before leaving, he pushed a commit to a private repo. A connector. Encrypted. No one reviewed it because he'd masked it as a cleanup script. I pulled the repo, decrypted it, and there it was. An outbound relay, target unknown, destination obfuscated. But it was listening, quietly, occasionally alive. Eric didn't steal anything. He didn't destroy. He planted a ghost. Something that could, if awakened, drain key metrics, copy user behaviors, replicate onboarding flows. In the wrong hands, it could rebuild our client's internal logic. Sell it, clone it, weaponize it. And the worst part, no one knew, because no one remembered Eric. I did. Not his voice, not his habits, his work. He was a shadow engineer, efficient and visible until now. I revoked the relay, deleted the repo, blacklisted the IP ranges, and then I wrote an internal memo, titled Architectural Trust and Memory, a Postmortem of Forgotten Threats. Not to shame anyone, but to remind them. This system isn't just code, it's history. And if we don't honor it, it starts to forget who it belongs to. Most people think systems break because of bad code. They don't. Systems break because of good code left unquestioned for too long. That's what Eric taught me. Not with words, with silence. After I removed the relay he'd left behind, I didn't tell anyone immediately. I needed to sit with it. Feel the full weight of what we'd almost missed. What we'd let grow in the blind spot. I wasn't angry, not at Eric, not even at the team. I was awake again. The thing about surviving betrayal is this. You start seeing patterns that others treat as background noise. You notice when a system feels too smooth. You sense when people are moving just a little too confidently inside something they don't fully understand. That's when mistakes happen. Not from carelessness, from comfort. So I changed the rules. Not with announcements. Not with new software. With practice. I called it the quiet rule. The premise was simple. If something has been untouched for more than 60 days, it must be reviewed. If it runs without errors for more than 90, it must be stress tested. If no one remembers what it does, it must be documented or destroyed. People resisted at first. Some thought it was overkill. Why mess with what's working? Because what's working isn't always what's safe. It's just what's unnoticed. And nothing in tech stays pure when it's unattended. The first month was painful. We found 6 undocumented services. 2 orphaned EC2 instances, 1 still pulling logs from a deprecated partner API. A public-facing test environment with no rate limiting. None of it had crashed, none of it had triggered alarms. But all of it was rot. Digital rot. The kind that seeps into healthy systems and waits for the worst possible moment to wake up. I didn't implement the quiet rule to control people. I did it because I knew what it felt like to be the only one who noticed the noise beneath the signal. And I wasn't going to be that person again alone. Eventually, the team adjusted. Junior engineers started proactively asking, "Do we know what this endpoint is doing?" Project leads began blocking releases to document even simple components. And for the first time since I rejoined, I didn't have to watch the logs like a hawk, because others were watching with me. Not because I told them to, but because now they felt the system too. The system had memory again. Not just mine, ours. I didn't announce it. There wasn't a Slack post, no calendar invite, no farewell lunch. Just a timestamp on my final commit 10:43 a.m. infrastructure handoff.yaml. And then I logged out. The system was fine. More than fine. It was stable. Tended to. Watched by people who understood that uptime wasn't a badge, it was a responsibility. They didn't need me anymore. And for the first time, that didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like graduation. I remember sitting at the edge of my desk watching the dashboards hum. No spikes, no error rates, no silent crawlers pinging the edges of the map. Peace. But not the fragile kind. Not the kind that comes after a firefight where you're still bleeding under your armor. This was the kind of peace that comes from finishing something. From walking away on your own terms. I packed light. 1 notebook. 1 USB key with diagrams no one asked for but might one day need. And the keycard I never returned the first time. I left it on Isabel's desk. No note. Just the card, face up. Like a signature. As I exited the elevator, I passed a group of engineers huddled over a screen. They didn't notice me. Didn't flinch. Didn't whisper. They were fixing something. Together. Like they belonged to it. Like it belonged to them. That was the moment I knew the system no longer carried my name. It carried its own. And that was exactly how it should be. I took the long way out, down the stairwell. Past the old server room that had been converted into a nap pod space. I laughed at that. Once I'd spent a night in that server room rebooting a failing RAID array with nothing but a pen light and a bottle of root beer. Now it was filled with beanbags. Progress, I suppose. Outside, the air was cold. Toronto in late spring, crisp, uncommitted. I didn't feel nostalgic. Didn't feel victorious. Just light. At home, I archived the last backup. Tucked the USB drive into a drawer. Closed my laptop. And I sat, not to think, not to plan, just to feel the full, clean silence of something truly finished. I don't think people ever really move on. I think we learn how to step around the parts of ourselves we once had to carry like armor. I don't miss the company. I don't miss the dashboards. I don't miss the power. But every now and then I miss the noise, the constant hum of crisis, the sharp, clean rhythm of problem-solving under pressure, the way your brain locks into something so completely the world falls away. These days, things are quieter. I wake up without checking logs. I go hours, sometimes days, without opening a terminal. I spend mornings on the porch of a rented cabin outside Toronto. There's no cell signal here, no Slack, no can you jump on a quick call. Just birds, coffee, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, a system is still running, still alive, still intact, because I built it right. That's what no one tells you about legacy. It's not the speeches, not the titles, not the company updates with your name in bold. It's what stays standing after you've left the room. It's the code no one rewrites, the design no one questions, the decisions that quietly keep people employed, protected, connected. Legacy is what they whisper, not what you say. A few weeks ago, I got a message from Jaden, the junior engineer who once asked me what a provisioning flow was doing. He didn't need help. He just wanted to let me know they'd launched a new service, built entirely on top of the foundation I left behind. We refactored the onboarding logic, kept your failover pattern. It still works beautifully. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the message and smiled, because that's what real revenge looks like. Not vengeance, not sabotage, but building something so solid it becomes untouchable. If this story found you at the right time, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed, but kept showing up anyway, kept building, then maybe this was your story too. So if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button. Not for me. For the quiet ones who keep the world running. Because they're stories. They're just getting started.